A warning before we begin. Some stories stain the memory, and the stain never truly fades. In the heart of the Victorian era, one woman's medical case perplexed the brightest minds and haunted the dark corners of history. Join us as we unravel the chilling tale of Agatha Alfred and her mysterious affliction. I tell you this as one who walked those streets years later, pressing a palm to the flaking brick of damp corners, listening for the residue of breath in places where breath had turned to fog. The town lay along a New England river that moved with a sluggish glitter under winter sun. Coal smoke hovered above gables. Hoarse brass chimed against harness leather. I stood beneath a gas lamp and saw soot swirl in the glass like a trapped ghost. Agatha had been a bookbinder's daughter, fingers stained with paste and dye, sleeves smudged with graphite. She knew the sigh of paper as it folded and the quiet thunder of a press closing. Before anyone spoke of illness, the town counted small trespasses. Clocks lost minutes without cause. A baker's yeast refused to rise 2 mornings running. The church bell rang once at noon when no rope moved. Whispers developed a geography of their own, curling along the mill sluice and the lace shop, drifting across the apothecary's polished bottles.
A river mist slid up Market Lane and turned the breath of passers-by into ribbons of silver. A black dog was said to pause at Agatha's stoop, staring at the door with the miserable patience of a mourner. Widow Pettigrew, who kept a canary and a sharp eye, told anyone who would listen that she smelled singed hair on still days and couldn't find the source. On the night, a sycamore tore free in a gale and toppled toward the bindery. It struck the cobbles without breaking a single pane, as if the tree had remembered its manners at the last instant.
The next morning, Agatha's father found faint ink stains on the inner side of the windows, letters reversed, words none of them had said in type. Doctors came on boots that clacked over slate, skirts lifted from puddles, instruments rolled into velvet cases. They gathered in parlors where beeswax candles burned low and fat, where carbolic had a bite in the air sharp enough to make eyes water. Agatha sat with a blanket tucked to her waist and a glaze of sweat at her hairline, fingers clasped so tight the knuckles were cold. Her pulse confused every hand that felt it, slow as if it were trying to remember a rhythm learned long ago. She complained of drafts in rooms without cracks, of a smell like old milk hanging over the bed toward dawn, of a sound at the baseboards like thread whipping through leather. Disease, mind, or visitation. During one consultation, the physician held a hand mirror to her lips and watched the fog. When he tilted it, the fog curled in a thin line he swore formed a letter A before it broke apart. Tinctures went down her throat with a botanical bitterness. Foxglove, valerian, laudanum measured with a steady drop. Night after night, blue bruises rose on her forearms in the shape of crescents, and by morning the crescents had moved. A surgeon traced them with his thumb and asked about sleepwalking. She shook her head and said she was awake enough to hear the coal settle in the stove and to count every click as it fell. She avoided mirrors, saying they dragged. When her hair caught on a comb, she let the strands fall to the floor with a flinch, as if each strand had clung to her skull with teeth. Candles guttered when she entered a room, then flared bright with a hiss once she sat down. I walked the floorboards of her narrow house long after they had ceased to notice footsteps, and I could swear the wood retained a memory of weight. Those who had been near her carried accounts that did not agree, except in the chill they produced. Thomas Hale, the town's vicar, claimed he stood at her bedside one December evening and saw frost form on the inside of the window, blooming outward from a point above her heart. The pattern resembled an engraving plate, minute lines cross-hatched until an image emerged, a thicket or perhaps a library of trees. He reached to wipe it away and withdrew his fingers with a raw sting as if he'd touched nettle. A night watchman swore the telegraph office clicked on its own when she passed, producing a short run of dots and dashes that meant nothing until the staff found the same sequence written on Agatha's collarbone in pale welts. A boy in the bindery told me he found paper feathers in the stairwell, filigreed sheets cut so fine the edges whispered. No one in the shop confessed to the craft. The Pettigrew canary fell still on its perch when Agatha's song floated from a second-story window, an old tune, lilting and foreign, whose words no one could place. The bird didn't drop dead, not then. It froze with its head lifted, beak open as if the note had turned to ice in its throat. At a supper, a spoonful of stew rose into the air between her hand and mouth as if tugged by a string and slid sideways into her lap with a soft, wet sound. The spoon left a coin of heat against her palm that she blew on until the skin stopped shimmering. A mirror in the hall kept her reflection a second longer than the room kept her body. When the reflection lifted its hand late, the ring she never wore flashed on a finger she had not raised. The end began with a letter. Delivered by a post rider in a gray coat, the envelope had no stamp, only her name in a thin script that resembled the threads of a tendon. She opened it alone at the workbench with the knife she used to pare leather. By the time her father came down from the attic to call her to tea, the blade lay in the paper waste, and her fingers were pressed to her throat. No blood, no wound. A redness bloomed where her skin met air, the faint outline of loops and bars, the impression of handwriting as if someone had pressed a pen into her through empty space. That night, the canary toppled to the bottom of its cage without a mark. The dog on the stoop left a wet print of its nose on the door and did not return. When the river froze edge to edge a week later, people crossed it to shorten their route to market, boots thudding dully on the milky surface. Agatha went out before light. The door creaked, the hinge exhaled, and a lid somewhere thumped in reply. She carried no shawl. Her breath lay ahead of her like smoke from a wreck. She had begun to sleep in a chair by the hearth with her shoes on. That morning the chair was empty, and a fan of char lay beneath it, as if the hearth had coughed during the night. They found her near midstream, upright within a low dome of clear ice formed over a hollow left by some warmth that had lingered longer than it should. Her dress clung, threads stiff as wire. In her mouth, pressed between teeth and tongue, rested a wad of paper pulp still damp. The doctors teased it out with forceps. Spread and dried, it showed part of a page she had bound weeks earlier, an index of ailments with their remedies: ague, bilious fever, blood loss, and beside blood loss a pen-side notation in her careful hand: do not assume source. Her funeral drew crowds that fidgeted beneath coats. Ash fell from the sky, though no one had lit a fire. The vicar read from Ecclesiastes while keeping his eyes down. Afterward I saw him burn his notes at the back of the churchyard, notes on which small loops and bars had appeared between lines in a color of ink nobody had mixed. Doctors sent reports to Boston and New York. Journals debated exposure, catalepsy, female nerves, deceit. A mesmerist insisted on unseen currents. A chemist argued for arsenical wallpaper. An old sailor sat on a crate by the river and spat and said it was the river itself that had put its cold thumb on her throat. The bindery closed 2 winters later. When I walked past, the glass still held smudges like reversed letters, and the floor smelt faintly of paste as if memory itself had a scent. To speak of a conclusion is to pretend the air made of those days does not move through our lungs now. Cabinets kept locks that refused to catch for a season. Photographs curled in their frames, lifting from the glue as if trying to breathe. Children sang the tune they weren't taught. Mothers told them to hush and did not say why they were afraid. Theories never fully left the candles and their bright rims of flame. Stories slid behind them and stayed. I came away with a sliver under my skin from the bindery door, a bit of wood that worked its way out months later as I washed my hands. The sliver left a pale line that sometimes rose as if listening. There are things we may never resolve about Agatha Alfred, only the shapes her life pressed into the fabric of a town that pretended at reason while counting its superstitions like coins. Her name still knocks through the telegraph records if you run your fingers quickly over the strips of paper they kept. 4 letters climbed and dipped by a metal arm that lacked a conscience. In the end, no single truth stood up without trembling, and perhaps trembling is the honest stance when we look at what happened to her. As the story of Agatha Alfred reaches its unsettling conclusion, what truths remain hidden in the shadows of her legacy? Join us for the next episode as we continue to explore the spine-tingling stories of America's most haunted locations.